Hey, it's Fox from Inferno Fox Gaming. Like the movie industry, video game companies look at sequels as a sure thing for well-known franchises because, after all, who wouldn't want Bubsy 3D 2? Seriously though, sequels in general have garnered a large amount of attention even in the relatively fledgling days of the video game industry. Just think about Mario Mania that ran across the country in the US when both Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3 had released. Or think about Dragon Quest 3 when it released in Japan. Kids ditched school just to play the game. These happen to be examples of sequels that really hit the nail on the head. But what about the ones that missed the mark? Today, I'm going to be talking about sequels to some of my favorite franchises that did miss the mark, only for them to see redemption later with the following game. So let's start off with a big one, and that is Super Mario Bros. 2. And nope, not the Doki Doki Panic reskin, the OG Japanese one. I personally enjoyed this game, especially the Famicom port we finally got on the Wii Virtual Console, as well as the one that's currently available on the Switch's NSO service. But where Super Mario Bros. 2 misses the mark is one word, and that is originality. There are all new levels that are frustratingly get good, tough, a couple new looking enemies with slightly varied behavior, and a couple modified sprites. It's no small wonder that those outside of Japan didn't get this sequel. But the next sequel after it removes all doubt, and that of course is with the venerable Super Mario Bros. 3. Not only can the player actively move backwards to previous parts of the level, seriously, we had to go through 2 Mario games for this, but we are greeted by absolutely gorgeous visuals, environments, and sprites with absolutely stellar level design and power-ups. And it's this latter point that I can't think of another 2D Mario game that has had a wider variety of power-ups than Super Mario Bros. 3. Although Super Mario Bros. Wonder does come close. So while Super Mario Bros. 2 Japan isn't an awful game, it's probably one of the weakest 2D Mario entries, with its direct sequel in Super Mario Bros. 3 being one of the greatest Mario games, NES games, and hell, one of the best games of all time ever made. Moving on to my favorite series of all time, and if you're a fan of my channel and you've subscribed, you'd know it's Final Fantasy. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure that you click like, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell for notifications. This series' sequels are wholly new games in the series, but with similar themes and monsters and whatnot. This one, though, I'm going retro with Final Fantasy II on the Famicom being the dud. Hironobu Sakaguchi and his team set the pace for the series by working the whole innovation angle here by going from the first to the second entry. Yes, both are turn-based, but gone are levels and experience points, opting for like a skill progression type system. They also got rid of the first entry's job system. And in doing so, Final Fantasy II allows the player's characters to sort of be molded into any type of fighter or mage that they would like. And the idea of using a skill or spell to increase its aptitude makes sense on paper, but the amount of grinding to make it effective is absolutely ridiculous. And Squaresoft would go back to this well with Secret of Mana's magic system, requiring tedious reuse to effectively gain levels with this. The second entry's only real merits beyond the fantastic soundtrack supplied by Nobuo Uematsu would be the small semblance of story and introducing a magic point-based magic system versus, of course, the first entry's ability to only cast a certain level of spell at like a specific number of times. But a lot of these issues from this second entry were totally remedied with Final Fantasy III on the Famicom. Squaresoft decided to get back to the basics, opting to bring back the leveling and experience point systems as well as the job classes, which thank goodness they did. Besides the story being maybe perhaps a bit softer, the third entry is, in my opinion, the most solid entry on the Famicom, with a lot of the guts that we'd come to know and see in the fourth entry on the SNES being present here in this third one. We're going to continue it's no surprise here when I mention Metroid Other M as a lackluster sequel. Directed by the same guy that also directed the venerable Super Metroid and other games in the series, Yoshio Sakamoto, he worked with Team Ninja to develop this entry. The gameplay itself is probably one of this entry's strongest attributes. I would best call mid. And it contains mostly third-person 3D traversal with some elements of first-person there when the player points the Wiimote at the TV, though this results in the player not being able to move Samus. So you get all the first-person aiming from Metroid Prime 3 without the ability to move. Yay! And to add to this fun is the fact that the entire game is controlled only with a single Wiimote. And that real tiny D-pad on the Wiimote being used to move Samus, I never really understood that because other games like Super Mario Galaxy and Legend of Zelda, both Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, had their characters move with the Wiimote nunchuck combination. And to make matters even worse is the ridiculous story that includes our bounty huntress and star, Samus Aran, who normally works stoically alone, submits herself to control from a former superior from the Galactic Federation. Just how this character was done dirty makes it hurt to know that Other M is canon. And this was confirmed to be canon in the historic profile featured in Metroid Dread. And speaking of Dread, Dread is the redeeming sequel to Other M that Metroid weebs such as myself have been waiting for. All of the sins of the past from Other M have been fixed with this entry. Samus now explores an entire planet on her own in classic 2D style, with limited interruption from her AI companion. That sort of feeling of isolation is very present, and that's something that's always been known for Metroid games. That's back in Metroid Dread, which really wasn't a thing at all with Metroid Other M. And Samus controls like a dream too. And I've not felt better controls for Metroid games since the days of Super Metroid. And she's also back to being an absolute badass, as shown by the few but excellent story cinematics in the game. My only gripe again with Dread is the kind of lackluster soundtrack. Had that delivered at the level of something even like Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Dread could have dethroned Super Metroid as the GOAT. So moving on to the penultimate entry, and this was the inspiration for this video, we're going to be talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 4. And yes, I know it has two releases as episodes 1 and 2. I don't really care as they're both pretty mediocre at best. And I remember seeing the marketing run-up to the first episode. Sega touted this as a return to form, especially after the many poor to lackluster Sonic games that had been releasing in the aughts. This was just going to be a Sonic versus Robotnik affair, no frills and full speed. When the game finally released digitally, it was a day one download for me, since I always enjoyed classic 2D Sonic the Hedgehog games. I didn't really mind the 3D ones, although honestly I've never been the biggest fan because of kind of how awkward Sonic seems to control it in them. And Sega managed to translate that awkwardness right into episode 1 in the form of Sonic moving extremely sluggishly. Sonic games also tend to have pretty colorful environments and fun speed sections. Most of the levels in Sonic the Hedgehog 4 were fairly generic looking, and it really didn't capture my attention at all. Episode 2, though, was a step in the better direction, but even adding Tails back wasn't enough to redeem 2D Sonic. Instead, we saw that redemption, of course, with Christian Whitehead's Sonic Mania. It really took Sega relying on a Sonic hacker to save 2D Sonic. Whitehead and his team captured that old school Sonic feeling with both like remixed old levels and brand new ones, all colorfully redone with an absolutely baller soundtrack. Sonic himself in Sonic Mania just feels right, with controls and movement that easily harken back to his Genesis days, or Mega Drive if you want to get international about it. Now, as we move on to the last entry I want to talk about here, it's time for some hot take salad. There's a reason I'm saving this one for last. The dud of the sequel that I'm going to say is Secret of Mana. Yes. And I'm not even talking about the mid-tier remake released in 2018. No, the OG one on the SNES. I played and absolutely loved the first entry in the Mana series, Final Fantasy Adventure on the Game Boy when it first released. Yes, it felt like a Legend of Zelda game in Final Fantasy clothes, but the gameplay was solid with extremely responsive controls and the music rocked. A couple years later, my older brother and I rented Secret of Mana, thinking it'd be, more of the same as Final Fantasy Adventure, and we were extremely disappointed when we played and it wasn't. The story in Secret of Mana wasn't really an improvement from the first one, which perhaps we got spoiled with the likes of Final Fantasy II US at the time, and we expected that same sort of level. And while the music was excellent, we had major issues with the gameplay. What annoyed us and had us return the game a day early in our 2-day rental were the god-awful hitboxes. Seriously, anytime that we controlled the main character Randy while fighting the first boss, for example, we kept getting hit by the boss's attacks even when they weren't literally landing on our character at all. As an adult, I went back in 2021 and played through the entirety of the first 3 games in the Mana series on the Collection of Mana. And this leads to my second issue with this entry, and which I've already mentioned earlier in the video, and that was the overly grindy nature of increasing Purim and Popoy's magic levels. Once I finally beat this entry in the Collection of Mana, I moved into Trials of Mana, or Seiken Densetsu, and I was floored with how much better this entry was from Secret of Mana. The main characters actually had personality and were fun and interesting to play as, with each of them having a varied fighting style. The story also varies a bit depending on which of the 6 characters the player decides to select as the main one. And while there's not much else variation story-wise, depending on the other 2 characters selected, it was still nice to be able to select which ones we wanted. When it comes to level progression of spells, I remember this being a much better system and less hassle than Secret of Mana. Battles themselves also felt much better. Unlike Secret of Mana, where it felt like there was a second or so lag for attacks from weapons to hit, it almost felt instantaneous in Trials of Mana. I also noticed the AI for the player's allies acted more intelligently in Trials versus Secret, though Trials of Mana does offer a more robust system of controlling the AI in the options when playing single player. The only setbacks with Trials compared to Secret is that I felt when you bringing up the menu system, when I hit the X button, it was noticeably slower to load. It felt like it took 2 to 3 seconds. And only 2 of the 3 players are controllable by human players versus Secret of Mana's 3. Yes, I'm aware that there are mods on the PC ROMs that allow for 3-player controllability for Trials. And I'm going to end my discussion about this particular entry with another hot take. Trials of Mana's soundtrack is better than Secret of Mana's. Both are high quality, don't get me wrong. This is like one soundtrack being a 9.5 over another that's a 9. I felt, though, that Secret of Mana's soundtrack kind of sounded a little kiddish and just lacks the personality that Trials of Mana's has. Trials gives the 6 different characters this sort of personality via their own individual themes, as well as the world's many different environments they explore. So let me know in the comments section below, because I know y'all are dying to comment on this, especially after that last entry. Let me know in the comments section which one of these that you have thoughts on. Which one of these do you agree with, or do you think maybe I missed the mark on? And let me know what you feel which sequels failed to carry the torch from the original, and if there's another entry after this one that betters that sequel. I've got more ideas for additional videos on this, featuring franchises like Mega Man, Resident Evil, the Ys series, Dragon Quest, and more. So definitely make sure that you like, subscribe, ring that bell for notification, because we got more fun video game content on the way. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and we hope you have a great day.